Imagine a movie so daring that even before it hit theaters, it sparked heated debates, street protests, and demands for censorship. A movie where a single scene could redefine not just careers, but an entire genre of filmmaking. That movie was Basic Instinct, released in 1992. Directed by Paul Verhoeven, the film became one of the most controversial thrillers of the decade. Its mix of sex, violence, and psychological mind games wasn't just entertainment, it was a cultural earthquake. When Basic Instinct premiered, it wasn't simply a film, it was an event. Audiences lined up to see what critics called both pure trash and a masterpiece of erotic cinema. At its core, it told a crime story, but what made it infamous was how boldly it crossed boundaries Hollywood usually avoided. The 1992nd were a time of experimentation, but this film shattered taboos that few dared to touch. And in the process, it ended up being banned, censored, and endlessly debated across the world. The power of Basic Instinct came not only from its shocking script, but from its cast. Michael Douglas played Detective Nick Curran, a man haunted by his past, addicted to danger, and always on the edge of self-destruction. Douglas was already a Hollywood heavyweight, having starred in Fatal Attraction and Wall Street, but Basic Instinct pushed him into darker, riskier territory. Then came Sharon Stone. Before this film, she was far from a household name. But as Catherine Tramell, the mysterious, brilliant, and dangerously seductive crime novelist, she delivered one of the most iconic performances of the decade. It was the role that catapulted her into superstardom, but also typecast her for years to come. That interrogation scene, where Stone's character flipped power dynamics in a single calculated gesture, became cinema legend. Jean Triplehorn made her feature film debut here, playing Dr. Beth Garner, a psychologist entangled both professionally and romantically with Douglas's character. Her presence added another layer of complexity and tension to the narrative. And with George Juza as Detective Gus Moran, the cast was rounded out by characters that pulled viewers deeper into a twisted world where desire and danger were inseparable. Together, this cast brought life to a story that blurred the line between thriller, erotic fantasy, and psychological study. In San Francisco, a blonde woman ties retired rock star Johnny Boz to a bed with a silk scarf during sex, then stabs him to death with an ice pick. SFPD detective Nick Curran and his partner, Gus Moran, investigate the murder. The prime suspect is Boz's girlfriend, crime novelist Catherine Tramell, whose latest novel mirrors the details of the killing. Catherine is uncooperative with the investigators, taunting them by smoking during questioning and exposing herself. Though released for lack of evidence, she becomes a person of interest when Nick learns that she has a history of close relationships with violent individuals. These include her girlfriend Roxanne "Roxy" Hardy, who killed her younger brothers as a teenager, and Hazel Dopkins, a convicted family murderer. Nick, a recovering alcoholic with a history of drug abuse and a prior incident in which he accidentally shot 2 tourists, attends mandatory counseling with police psychologist Dr. Elizabeth Garner, with whom he has an unstable romantic relationship. He discovers that Catherine is using him as the inspiration for a new character, a detective who is murdered after falling for the wrong woman. When Nick suspects that his confidential psychiatric file has been leaked, he assaults Internal Affairs Lieutenant Marty Nielsen, who had access to the file. Nielsen is later found murdered, and Nick is placed on administrative leave. At Boz's nightclub, Nick sees Catherine and Roxy using cocaine. Later, at Catherine's home, she ties Nick to the bed during sex while Roxy watches. Moran expresses concern about Nick's involvement with Catherine and uncovers that Nilsson received a $50,000 payment months before Nick met her. Roxy, jealous of Nick, attempts to kill him in a car attack, but dies in the ensuing crash. Catherine reveals that she had an intense relationship with a woman in college who became obsessed with her. Nick suspects the woman was Garner, who claims the obsession went the other way. Investigating further, Nick finds that Nilsson had withdrawn a complaint Catherine filed against Garner years earlier. He also uncovers that a professor shared by Garner and Catherine was killed with an ice pick in an unsolved case resembling Catherine's fiction, and that Garner's former husband was murdered in another unresolved case investigated by Nilsson. Nick finds the draft of Catherine's new novel, which depicts a detective discovering his partner's body in an elevator. Catherine abruptly ends their relationship. Later, Moran tells Nick he has arranged to meet Catherine's former college roommate in Oakland to learn more about her and Garner. When Nick arrives, he finds Moran stabbed to death with an ice pick in an elevator, mirroring the novel. Garner arrives shortly afterward, claiming she was lured there by a message. Believing she is reaching for a weapon, Nick shoots and kills her, but she is found to be unarmed. Police find evidence in Garner's apartment implicating her in multiple murders, including files and photographs related to Catherine. Nick is left confused and emotionally shaken. Later, Catherine returns to Nick's apartment and they have sex. As they lie in bed discussing their future, an ice pick lies unseen beneath the bed. So why did Basic Instinct cause such an uproar? The answer lies in its combination of explicit sexuality, graphic violence, and morally ambiguous characters. The most infamous moment, the interrogation scene where Sharon Stone's character briefly uncrosses her legs, was unlike anything mainstream cinema had shown before. For some, it was a brilliant act of subversion. For others, it was shameless exploitation. Censors around the world reacted immediately. In countries like Singapore, China, and Ireland, the film was outright banned. In India, authorities claimed the sexual content was too extreme for public viewing. Even in the United States, the MPAA nearly slapped the movie with an NC-17 rating, which would have killed its box office potential. Director Paul Verhoeven and the studio had to make multiple edits just to secure an R rating. But censorship didn't stop there. In Australia, certain versions were heavily cut. In the UK, the film faced major controversy, and LGBTQ+ activists staged protests at screenings, claiming the movie demonized bisexual women by portraying them as dangerous, violent, and manipulative. Feminist groups also protested, arguing that the film perpetuated misogyny by mixing sex with violence and reducing women to dangerous seductresses. The movie became a lightning rod for debate. Was it a progressive film that gave Sharon Stone's character total control over her sexuality and power? Or was it a step backward, reinforcing dangerous stereotypes? The fact that it was banned in multiple countries only fueled its reputation as a dangerous, forbidden film. Despite the backlash, or perhaps because of it, Basic Instinct became a box office juggernaut. Made on a budget of around $49 million, it grossed over $350 million worldwide. Controversy drove audiences to theaters, curious to see what was so shocking. For Sharon Stone, it was a career-defining role. She became one of the most recognized actresses of the 1992nd, though she also struggled with being typecast as the femme fatale. Michael Douglas cemented his reputation for playing morally flawed men entangled in dangerous relationships. Director Paul Verhoeven, already known for pushing boundaries with RoboCop and Total Recall, further established himself as Hollywood's provocateur. But the legacy of Basic Instinct wasn't just commercial. The film triggered endless academic debates about gender, sexuality, and power in cinema. It fueled discussions about censorship and the limits of eroticism in mainstream movies. And it paved the way for a wave of erotic thrillers in the 1992nd, including films like Sliver, Disclosure, and Body of Evidence. Even decades later, the film's impact hasn't faded. The interrogation scene remains one of the most analyzed and parodied sequences in movie history. Whether seen as empowering, exploitative, or both, it forced conversations that Hollywood could no longer ignore. So, was Basic Instinct banned because it was too explicit, too violent, or too ahead of its time? Perhaps the real answer lies in how it challenged audiences to confront their own discomforts with sex, power, and morality. Love it or hate it, one thing is certain. Basic Instinct became more than just a movie. It became a cultural flashpoint. Even today, when we look back, the film reminds us of a simple truth. Sometimes, the most banned movies are the ones we remember forever. And that's why Basic Instinct remains one of the most unforgettable thrillers ever made.